Welcome to memoQ Talks, where we talk to industry leaders about their experiences, lessons learned, and what works best across all areas of localization. Now here's your host.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to memoQ Talks. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of memoQ Talks. And this is a special episode because we have a great guest, and I'm in a great environment. I'm sitting outside my hotel room down in Palm Springs. Today, we're going to be talking with Barbara Peralta, who is the Director of Life Science Solutions for Acolad Life Sciences. Barbara has about 30 years of experience in the local industry and about 15 years of experience specifically in language services related to life sciences. And so we're going to talk today about, some trends in life sciences and what does the future hold for translation in this space. But first off, let's welcome Barbara. Barbara, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. Like I said, I'm in sunny Palm Springs. Just
Yes.
three days ago, I was in cold, rainy Seattle. So I'm no complaints at all. Where are you at?
I'm in Colorado. I'm in Boulder, Colorado.
Boulder, Colorado.
Acolad has an office here in the Denver metro area, but we're all working from home these days.
Yeah.
So I'm in my
Well,
home in Boulder, Colorado.
Boulder is one of my favorite towns. I was in Fort Collins last fall, or actually it was early winter. Love it up there. Beautiful part of the country. You don't have palm trees though.
No, we don't, but we do have blue skies. We have blue skies today.
You do. Yeah. So it's very nice to have. Hey, I got to ask. I mean, you have a ton of experience in this space. What are you seeing in terms of, trends or the biggest changes, I should say? Is it, volume changes or the type of translation in life sciences that is being required now? Prices changes, tools. I mean, what are you seeing as some of the biggest changes over the last few years?
Well, I'd say that perhaps the not so much a new change, but a continuing challenge for life sciences customers is meeting regulatory requirements. And those requirements change all the time. Last year and this year, we have the new MDR, IVDR regulation in Europe that's driving a lot of change for med device and IVD device customers. That's requiring that customers think about how they can transform their organization to meet those requirements more readily. Same thing on the pharma side. We have regulations, a new regulation this year, CTR, centralized translation or centralized or clinical trial regulation that centralizes and harmonizes that whole submissions process within the EU community again. And if you want to look at challenges globally, each country and each region has their own set of regulations that are somewhat similar to MDR or CTR, but have their own different flavor, whether you're going into China or Russia or Latin American markets. All of them have their own set of requirements. And so for a med device or for a pharma company to be in a place where they can respond and meet those requirements is always challenging. And as a language service provider, we're here to be equally informed and equally flexible and responsive to those regulatory changes.
Wow. I mean, first off, that's, I mean, it is it's a massive challenge because you have all these different regulatory bodies by industry, by geography, for example, and you have to keep abreast of their latest, regulatory stance. How do you keep abreast of what's going on in all these different industries and all these different locations?
Well, that's primarily my role is to stay abreast, and I work with partners who are regulatory experts in the industry and in the various sectors to help us stay informed and stay ahead. Be prepared and understand what those regulatory changes mean, how they impact language services, and how we can be better situated to respond to our customers' needs as they try to themselves to respond to regulatory changes. And so that's primarily it, just staying informed and kind of connecting the dots to the language services industry.
Can you give some specific examples from any of those regulatory bodies of of new regulations that affect translation or content creation workflows, and then how you have coached or helped your customers respond to those?
Yeah, a great example is the MDR regulation. In the past, it was an MDD, Medical Device Directive, and now it's a regulation with a lot stricter rules around what you need to have in place for market authorization, but also what you need to have in place um, post-market for surveillance and getting feedback from the market on performance of product, and that has a lot of impact on language services. It's always been a requirement in order to introduce a product in country in the EU to have labeling translated, but now that labeling has new requirements around UDI and storing of that information in a centralized database, as well as requirements around keeping that labeling up to date based on post-market surveillance and feedback from the market. All of this is in the effort to be more transparent to the end user, to the patients who are benefiting from these medical devices. And so as a language service provider, we see a lot of connections between labeling and, let's say, post-market surveillance reporting. There's a new requirement, for example, around a new document that a med device company has to generate called the SSCP, which has to be for class 3 devices, and implantables has to be updated annually. And this is a new requirement that could have large impact to a medical device company. We see that there are a lot of commonalities between that new reporting requirement and the labeling. And as a translation service provider, language service provider, we've stored all of that labeling translation in our translation memory databases. And so we are seeing ways that we can help our customers to leverage previously translated, previously authored content in the labeling space to be leveraged into that new reporting requirement, and vice versa. There's even more opportunities for companies in the med device area to look at component structured content authoring and component content management to leverage information that they're gathering in post-market, using that information in various reporting, such as the SSCP, but also to update their labeling and stay in compliance with any changes that have to happen to their product and to their labeling and to their reporting based on post-market information.
I feel like every time you give me an answer, my brain just explodes and I get like so many more questions because, and I mean, it's just a testament to the depth of your knowledge and what you're seeing out there. First off, a very simple question. You mentioned UDI. What is that?
UDI is a unique document, I think, or device identifier. It's a number that the EU is saying every device that's introduced into the market needs to have this number. It needs to be on the product, on the labeling. It needs to be stored in the EU database, again, for tracking and transparency purposes, so that patients and users can get access to this information in an easy way.
Okay, excellent. That totally makes sense. Now, you also mentioned post-market surveillance, and I read one of your papers on that, and it's actually a very interesting field for me, just because of the sheer volume of content that I would anticipate being created, and some of the different tools and techniques and processes that are being able to kind of monitor that that content. Can you talk a little bit, maybe give it another little higher level overview of what post-market surveillance is, but then talk about, how are companies, or how are you helping companies to kind of, monitor the signal for that content and flag what's important and what's not?
Right. So post-market surveillance can happen in a variety of different ways. One is through adverse events reporting as the product is in the field or in clinical evaluation. You'll get from the clinicians adverse events reporting. And so if this product is in a global market, in the EU, for example, you'll get a lot of that reporting in the local language. And so that's where we step in and can quickly and efficiently translate those materials so that the med device company can then assess, what the risks are, what is the severity of the adverse event, and what are the risks, and then take action accordingly. Um, uh, there are rules around how quickly a med device company needs to respond based on the severity of the adverse event. And so we have to be, as a language service provider, agile enough to get that translated and get it into the hands of our med device sponsor so that they can take appropriate action. So that's one way. Another way might be just part of the MDR guidance is that as part of their post-market surveillance plan, a med device company needs to be more proactive about gathering information, not just waiting for an adverse event to be reported. And so, looking at literature that's out there, scanning for in social media for information, and that's where some of the tools of the trade can come in to help with our language capabilities to help scan and research and gather that information for our med device sponsors and give them that translated information so that they can use this information for further assessment of risk and safety.
So do you, is it all human translated, or do you have a process to MT something and then flag certain terms or phrases as they come up?
Well, most of what we're using MT for is obviously for machine translation. We use AI for machine translation. And because of the tight reporting requirements, MT is part of how we can do this quickly and efficiently, always with a human post editor who has the life sciences background to make sure that
Right.
we are still delivering to quality. This is a medical field, and quality is still of the utmost importance. And so it's always with post editing effort in conjunction with machine translation, as well as with translation, the traditional tools, translation memory, etc.
I'm
But
glad
there
you
is an
mentioned that, because
opportunity.
we do have a translation memory platform. Sorry, little
Everybody
product
does.
plug there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, translation is just part of the tools of the trade, right? And MT is also becoming part of that arsenal of tools that we apply to get to be agile, streamlined, and efficient. Um, but AI can also be used, and many of our medical and life sciences customers are using it to assess, to do an assessment of risk, right? To evaluate the data that they're getting through their post-market surveillance, and to assess risk. And we can help with identifying, where we can help to categorize uh, uh, some of that risk, but it would still require our sponsors' quality teams to really assess, since they have the subject matter knowledge on their specific product. They would still own the final assessment of that risk, but we could flag some of that information as we translate and do our own content analysis on that
Yeah,
material.
because if they don't have the tools to get the source content into the content that they want to deal with, they're going to be looking at signal that they can't really decipher, right?
Right,
So yeah,
exactly. So harmonization of that data is part of what we're doing in our language services, not just translation, but helping to kind of harmonize that data so that it can be read in by AI engines to assess that content.
excellent. Earlier, you'd mentioned structured content and templates, and you'd mentioned it, I think, in the context of instructions for use, or maybe it was labeling. It's also part of like lay summaries and things like that. Can you maybe talk a little bit about why is structured content becoming increasingly important, and maybe some of the applications down path applications?
Right. So as I said, there's new reporting requirements around lay summaries and SSCPs that share a lot of common content that appears in your traditional labeling. And the labeling has always been a requirement in the EU to have that material translated in order for market authorization. But now with post-market surveillance being new requirements around that and new documentation that also needs to be translated, we can leverage a lot of that content across across what is traditionally kind of siloed activity. Labeling is usually produced by a labeling group within our med device sponsors, and then these quality reporting is produced by quality or regulatory. The two groups aren't always talking to each other, and so having all of that content in a structured format within a centralized repository means that you can share that content, you can publish in different channels, in labeling as well as in the reporting, quality reporting. But you can also use that same content, or it'll facilitate the update of that content, which is also a requirement under MDR that these reporting documents be updated annually or biannually, depending on the class of the device. And so it really streamlines the whole end to end. You know, you're getting feedback from the market that will impact your product and the safety requirements and communication of that product. And that goes into your quality reporting as well as your labeling. And so having all of that in a CMS with structured content will facilitate all of that reuse. And there's also reporting that actually doesn't need to get translated, but can also benefit from structured content because that's also sharing the same information and that's used in further reporting, perhaps only in English, but it still will facilitate all of that process.
There, I turned my mic off because I'm at the pool, and of course they turn the pool music on. And but this is going to be a great test because we're recording this in Microsoft Teams, and I turned on the noise suppression feature. Can you hear the music?
No, I can't. But my heater just went on.
I can't hear your heater. You can't hear my music, and my music
good.
is awesome, but
Good.
probably not great for the podcast. But I mean, this noise suppression is pretty cool because it basically takes my voice and then everything behind that it's supposed to block out. And if not, I'll have to edit it out afterwards. Anyway, you got to roll with the punches, right? I think we could spend probably another hour just sifting through all the different applications for structured content. But one of the key points is organizations are creating this content in multiple different silos, and they're kind of reinventing the wheel each time. That's an extra cost. It's also an extra risk because
Yeah.
if you get it right over here, but you don't get the terminology right over there, and it's not consistent, you have potential issues. And the stakes are pretty high in life sciences.
Right.
You don't want to mess that up. Let me ask you two more questions. One about, because we've been talking a lot about what's going on in the EU. What's something specific that people that are working in life sciences in North America that they should be aware of?
Something specific that they should be aware of. Well, I'm sure.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, any recent regulatory changes, anything like that?
Well, MDR and IVDR MDR went into effect last year, and IVDR this year for the EU. But other countries are following suit. You know, they have their own regulations that are very similar to MDR, IVDR. So you have the same sort of regulation in China, in Japan, in Russia. You know, so being aware of what those implications are, how it affects your global product plan.
Rollout. I mean,
right,
yeah, right.
exactly.
Because if you're selling into the EU, you're out selling into China. And I'm assuming you help companies with that, because if I'm sitting in an office here, a big challenge, I'm sure, all these companies, they have their regulatory, their compliance teams, et cetera. But they're looking at regulatory compliance from a huge, the 30,000 foot view. You're very much focused on the linguistic, the localization side, right?
And so, we partner with consultants, experts in the regulatory space because there's a lot about the regulations that don't impact language services, obviously. So there's a whole upstream clinical requirement under MDR, that will impact a med device company. That doesn't necessarily affect us in language services. So we can bring expertise through our partnerships to help med device companies get ready. But we're also very cognizant of how these regulations impact language services, and also trying to connect the dots. We've been doing labeling traditionally for many, many years. And now with the new requirements, we've done the analysis and we see where those leverage points are and where we can achieve efficiencies and achieve a lot in cost savings and time savings, as well as reduce risk. And so from a language service perspective, we're highly focused on that, but we're aware that there are other impacts to our customers and can bring the expertise to help them get ready. And the same thing is happening on pharma, except that pharma is perhaps a little bit more advanced. Their requirements have been in place for some time. They continue to evolve and have impact to language services, but we can bring experts along to help our customers understand the full gamut of that regulatory, of those regulatory changes.
One of the things I love about this space is it's complex, dynamic, and rapidly growing and evolving. Having come into the translation industry, actually came in with a company that worked primarily in the financial services space, and then transferred over more to like a generalist company. And the difference is amazing, because when you're just a generalist, you're kind of selling a commodity. But if you've got specialized expertise in terms of processes, technologies, tools, etc., regulatory compliance, you're bringing real value add to the table, and that's always much more enjoyable. Let me ask you, in terms of technology, whether that's AI, machine learning, you mentioned a couple of those, or it could be just automation, different tools. What are you seeing right now as critical, and then down the road expecting to, become more involved in the local workflows in this industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think COVID has really had a serious impact, especially on the pharma side with clinical trials. Clinical trials have had to, or pharma and CRO companies have had to adopt some techniques to handle the what they're now calling decentralized clinical trials, where you've got things happening remotely and happening more quickly and much more with a lot more agility. And I think it's good for the industry, actually, because the speed with which the industry responded with vaccines and treatments really transformed how we approach that whole clinical trial process. And so we're seeing a lot of new technologies being introduced in this decentralized model, more telehealth, obviously, and where we can step in, and where there's technology that could help with this is, on-demand interpretation, on-demand chat support, multilingual, chat support,
Right.
and having the technology available to be able to provide those services for whether it's a pharmaceutical company or a CRO who's having to respond very quickly and put these systems and processes in place to be able to meet the demand of more agility and faster, speedier time to market.
Again, that's all from where I sit. That's all good news, because opportunity to introduce technology for technological solutions for increasingly complex work environments. So it makes sure that we'll have a job tomorrow. So
Right.
that's good.
Yeah.
Good for all.
We have to stay on our toes as well to make sure that we're there to meet the needs, right? And
Exactly. Well, hey, Barbara, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure, like I said, we could go like an hour on each one of these topics. But memoQ Talks, we do like 30 minutes, and that's the whole idea of it. I would like to remind everybody that Barbara is going to be part of our next Life Sciences Roundtable discussion, which will be held in March. And we're going to talk about this, and we're going to go a little bit deeper dive on some of these topics with Barbara and our other panelists. So, hey, Barbara, thank you so much for today, and we'll talk soon.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining memoQ Talks, where we talked with industry leaders about their experiences and lessons learned to gain new insights about what works best across all areas of localization. Join us next time on memoQ Talks.